Let's go.
Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. I'm your host, David Horsager. Join me as I sit down with influential leaders from around the world to discuss why leaders and organizations fail, top tactics for high performance, and how you can become an even more trusted leader. Welcome to the Trusted Leader Show. It's David Horsager. I have a special guest. We've been friends for over 2 decades, or about 2 decades. It's not every time that you have on the Trusted Leader Show someone who goes by doctor, someone who's president of a college, someone who is an admiral, someone who's captained a ship for our country, a U.S. Coast Guard, someone who's a great dad, father, friend, and is still learning every day. I remember I was young when I spoke at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, and he invited me to be there almost 2 decades ago. And all those, I think 1,000 or however many cadets in the auditorium, and he sat on the front row taking notes as much as any cadet. So I'm just thrilled, and it's fun to it's really a privilege to call you a friend, and it is with respect, but also with your permission that you asked me to call you Mike today. So please welcome to the show, Doctor. I'm going to say it all, Doctor, Admiral, President Michael Alfultis, but today we're going to call him Mike. Thanks for being on the show.
Warren, David, first lesson, where does 20 years go? Time is a precious commodity, and it's amazing how fast time goes. I remember when I was first took this job, I was meeting with one of our alumni who's been associated with the college for like 60 years, and he says, he's in his late 70s. Mike, I think he said something like 1,000 days to live, and he basically reminded me how short my tenure as president is going to go. And I can't believe I've been president for 8 years, and it really has gone by lightning fast. And you start to realize really how precious a commodity time is, and how precious every day is, and how we have to really be mindful of how we spend every day.
Yeah, every day matters. Every day counts. We say it, little things done consistently make the biggest difference. Give us a little, you've had a long, big journey, but give us the 2-minute cliff notes, something we don't know about you, and just a 2-minute background for those that don't know you. Sure.
I was born, bred, and raised in the Midwest. Actually, spent 11 years in St. Paul, Minnesota, which David knows. And then I went to high school in Ohio. I made decisions to join the Coast Guard, having never seen the ocean a day in my life before I went to the Coast Guard Academy. I served in the Coast Guard for 28 years, retired in 2010. The 21 of those 28 years, I was actually a permanent military faculty member of the Coast Guard Academy. Again, that's where Dave and I had one of our many interactions together. I taught marine science and oceanography, became head of the science department, felt really called to continue in higher education. So when I retired in 2010, I went to work for the University of Connecticut, where I was the chief administrative officer of one of their regional campuses. Really was not looking to leave UConn, loved the job I was doing, loved the campus I was leading. But a friend of mine saw the advertisement for president of SUNY Maritime College in New York State in the Bronx. She wanted to nominate me for the position. I told her she could nominate me. I didn't think I stood any chance of getting the job. And then in 2014, I became president of SUNY Maritime College. And I've been there ever since.
And give us one quick background in your family.
So, wonderful wife, Kim. We just did 39 wonderful years of marriage. We have 2 sons. My son, David, who served in the Marine Corps for 5 years, and he's currently down here in North Carolina. That's where I'm at right now, visiting with my son, David. My younger son, Matthew, went to a small SUNY campus near Poughkeepsie called SUNY New Paltz. And he's lucky enough to be back at his alma mater, where he is the assistant director for emergency management.
Well, you've had a full life already, but there's a lot to go. I was just talking to my mom and dad yesterday, and dad's will be 93 next month and still running the farm and cutting wood up there. He's they like to heat by fire, and I can see, lots of life left, and we're lots of life to do, lots of important things, and you've got a whole lot to give back to our world, and we just thank you for doing it for our country too. So
thank you.
I want to jump right in here on a few things. One, let's start. We're going to get into all kinds of things that people are going to want to hear, I think. But let's just start with this. I see leaders like you. They're leading. They have very heavy. We've talked about some of the weight of the positions you've had, some of the darts that get thrown at you, all kinds of things. But what habits do you have outside of work that have helped you in work? What are some things that you do? I don't know, physical, spiritual, health. What are you doing to stay kind of fresh, relevant, and capable so you can go manage these 16-hour days, or the weight of a captain of a ship, or the whatever? Are there any little things you were kind of doing consistently along the way that you saw? Maybe even some for a time. I journaled for a time, but things that kind of helped you, are really important to you consistently?
Well, it's interesting you ask that question, because when I first took this job, I put my heart and soul in this job, and I literally, it was 7 days a week, like you said, 16 hours a day, and literally I made my life revolved around the job. But the longer I've been here, I realized I could not keep that pace up, and so really being more intentional about even on a day-by-day basis, just taking downtime and just say, okay, and just, taking my dog for a walk every day, trying to get some exercise in, just the little things to help with the stress of the position, and then being intentional about taking time off. My director of human resources, she's great because she nags me. She says, okay, when you take vacation, make sure you take vacation. Don't worry about the job. Don't do email. Just turn it all off. And, I've learned more and more the longer I've been in this position that really the school can operate just fine without me for a day or a week. And the really important part of just really taking that time to decompress, focus on other things. I love, David, you asked, I love working. I love gardening. So one of my big things is, my wife will tell you, it's either with my dog or I'm gardening. But I love being outside, working in the yard. I find that just to be so therapeutic. We joke about I probably grow the most expensive tomatoes in the world, but it's not really the expense of what I'm doing on those tomatoes. It's the act of being out there and thinking about something else other than work. And
sometimes the best ideas come then, right? Like I remember the mentor of mine years ago, and he's passed, but he was the CEO of Dayton Hudson Corporation, which became then CEO of many know Target Corporation, and he took over he was president of one of the units, and then he became, but later, of course, became overall CEO. But he said it hit him when his HR, his senior leader said, how many days have you taken off this year? How much time have you taken? He said, well, none. I don't have any time. I'm CEO. I've got to do all this. And the overall CEO said to him, do you think you're more important than me? You think you're better than me? And he said, and the overall CEO at the time, before he became it, said, I get 7 weeks vacation and I've taken every single day. You think we're running this okay? And he started taking time. And he later in his life, when he was, overall CEO of Dayton Hudson and all that, he said one of the key things he did, the other 3 weeks he did family, Christmas, different things, but 2 weeks every fall, 2 weeks every spring, he took at this place where he'd get up an hour later than normal, 6 instead of 5, or 5, and he would walk on the beach, and he'd have a notebook in his pocket. And you just made me think about this. It's like gardening. Like I love to garden too. I love to be out there. But I was just thinking some of my best ideas, not that I'm trying to think about, I'm trying to refresh. But he said he would walk along the beach, and it took him a week. And in the second week, all these ideas came. So his mode for those 2 weeks was, I go along the beach with a notebook. All morning, I read. And he goes back and sits down and he reads after that. And then in the afternoon, he plays golf with his wife, eats a nice meal, and goes to bed. And that was his 2 weeks in the fall and 2 weeks in the spring. Now, I have yet to take that kind of time off, but it makes me think of that kind of pause and time away, kind of like you, just getting in the garden. And as you know, I love to garden. We're on a little hobby farm. Hobby farm, that's exactly what that means, is it costs a lot more than, it's where you throw money out instead of make any. But, those expensive tomatoes can taste good too.
Yeah. So real briefly, Dave, so, our home, I live on campus. I live on campus in the Bronx. Our home is upstate, and it's on a lake upstate. And, again, being intentional about, during the school year, I can't get up there every week, but I make it a point of getting up there at least twice a month. And just, being out on the lake, walking the dog. My staff laugh at me because I do like you. I get ideas. I take Rosie for a walk and I send emails to my staff, Walk with Rosie is the title. And here's the idea that came there, my Walk with Rosie.
Yeah.
So I agree with you when you take those times and just, walk the dog or go on the boat or work in the garden. I'm like you. I've gotten the habit now, frankly, with my phone. I just open my reminders thing on my phone and just quickly type in ideas or reminders of, I got to do that. You get in the rush of the day and there's things you need to get done and you forget what they are, but they pop up later. I go, I got to put that in my phone. So what I've been doing lately, that's worked really well for me. It's just putting those reminders in my phone when they pop in my head so I don't drive myself crazy an hour later going, What was that thing I was supposed to do?
And a notebook for me by my bed. I'll wake up and then I can go back to sleep. But if I don't have it right there and get it out. So that's, this is important. It's important for me right now, actually, because as you know, I'm walking by senior leaders. I sometimes take the weight of their trust issues and challenges. And then I'm carrying that and I'm carrying my, running this. And I got to pausing, thinking, rejuvenating, really good reminders. So, Let's jump into some, you have had, I've watched you lead with such courage and grace in the midst of some very challenging times. And we could go back to, I think, a commanding officer at the Coast Guard Academy, some of the other things, but let's jump into lately at the college. Let's just, in this role, my brother says we're in a more critical world than we've ever been in without the ability to critically think. And I often say, if you want to get critiqued for a living, my experience, if you want to get critiqued for a living, if you want that your job in life, give a speech, everybody's critiquing you, write a book, everybody's critiquing you, or lead anything. And you're in no top position, whether it's pastor, president of a college, or CEO, you get critiqued. But how do you deal with trying to do what's right in the midst of that world where you're nationally, or people are critiquing you from papers to life to blogs to board of trustees or whatever? How do you manage that well?
I don't know if I have a secret answer to that question, David. So as you and I have discussed, in this position, I have become subject to at times very social media attacks from various constituent groups associated with the college, mainly alumni. And the social media attacks are typically not anchored in truth. They typically exaggerate, they fabricate, and it's very difficult because, my reaction is I just want to just go toe to toe with them and try to correct everything. And, and like my chief of staff and my communications director, my provost, like, Mike, don't get into that with them because you just enable them more. You give them when you engage with them, you give them a platform. And so it's really, really hard as a leader sometimes just to not do anything. I think one advantage of social media is, you may be in the fire for a week. A week later, they're moving on to something else. And so that's what my staff keep reminding me is, Mike, it's, what they're saying is terrible. But you know what? If you enable them, it's just going to drag the whole thing out longer. It's going to give them a platform that you don't necessarily want to give them. And give it a week, and they're going to move on to something else.
That's hard when and I know some of your challenges we've talked about, but when people are outright lying, they don't know the truth about that, and they're blowing up their blog or their sphere of influence by saying something. That's hard. How do you deal with that?
David, you can question, maybe the decisions I make, maybe you can question, maybe where I'm trying to take the college. You may question, my strategic plan and say, maybe this might not be the right plan for the college. You can question that, but the hardest part, David, is don't question my integrity. Mm-hmm. And that's the hardest thing, to just keep your mouth shut about and let the slings and arrows go, even when it gets to the point where they're really calling into question your integrity. But again, I found my staff's advice is correct. If I engage with them, it goes back and forth, and the truth really doesn't come out. And I think the only way the truth comes out is by, building relationships with people, so that when these things happen, everyone goes, well, I know Mike, and I know that isn't Mike. And so I think the key is to be truthful and authentic and build authentic relationships with as a broad constituency as you can, so that when these things happen, you don't have to speak, because other voices will speak for you and say, I know that's not him.
What would you say, within what you can share, what's the hardest thing you've had to go through, and how did you deal with it? I'm working with your listeners today. We know that some senators are often listening. We know that CEOs are listening. We know that people they're in your role. They have the weight of leadership, and yet they're getting attacked for things, and they're trying to lead well. Believe it or not, some people, many people think all the government's bad. There are senators and representatives that want to do what's right. They're often not in the news, way over on the right or way over on the left. They're trying, and yet they just get what's the hardest thing you've been through what have you learned from it?
How much time do we got, David? So I'll try to be brief. So this past spring, I made, part of our strategic plan was, so at Maritime College, we have a regiment of cadets. If you're by U.S. law, if you're in a merchant mariner preparation program, like at the 6 state maritime academies, we're one of the 6. If you're in a merchant mariner preparation program, you're required by federal law to be in a regimental structure, a regiment of cadets. So about 2/3 of our students are in the regiment. And part of our strategic plan was to do a review of the regiment of cadets, how to make the regiment better, how to make it stronger, how to build pride in the regiment of cadets. And so I brought in 8 very high level, people who have been with experience with other regiments at other organizations, either the other federal service academies, private schools that have regiments. So I brought them in, and they basically engaged with our leadership, they engaged with the cadets, and they produced a report, an external review report. So it was an external review of someone from outside looking in and saying, what's the strength of the regiment, where can the regiment improve? 4 of these people were from higher education, 4 of the people were actually alumni. And they wrote a report. This is one of those things, as a leader, sometimes things don't turn out the way you expect. So the report was, they really had some stuff in the report that I would rather not have had in the report, about climate and culture, some sexual assault cases that have been dealing with, sexual harassment cases that we have been dealing with. And it was good to be truthful. But in the report, the details they put in the report violated federal policy protection for our students, because the details of these incidents were such that we're a small school and everyone know who that cadet was or what that incident was and who it was involved with. So when we released the report, I made the decision to redact portions of the report that violated the privacy of the individuals involved. And there's also accusations against staff, and I had to, and so they violated the privacy of the individual. Also, we redacted small portions of the whole report. We redacted 1.5%. So we released 98.5% of the report. So there's a maritime blog site that people approached about the fact that we redacted some report, and he ran an article that, quote, I was engaged in a cover-up of the climate culture of the school, that I was covering up sexual harassment and sexual assault at the school, and that I redacted large portions. That was a direct quote. I redacted large portions of the report. So that was a whole headline that he released on his maritime blog site. A congressional staffer, House congressional staffer, read his article, approached me and said, I demand you release the unredacted report. I said, I can't do that. It violates federal law. He said, well, we, Congress, we handle classified stuff all the time. You need to release to me on unredacted report. So at that point, I contacted our legal office for the system, SUNY system. SUNY system agreed with me. They issued him a letter, again, explaining the portions of federal law that would be violated if we released to him an unredacted report. And he sent me an email that said, and I still have it, if you don't release that unredacted report, I'm going to make life difficult for you. I did not release the unredacted report. And so I became subject of I was a subject during a congressional hearing where the chairman of the hearing called me out personally for not releasing that unredacted report. So now I get another headline in the same maritime blog site, Admiral Alfultis refuses to release rape report to Congress. It wasn't a rape report. So he ended up changing the headline to SASH report, sexual harassment, sexual assault report, which it was not again. It was a review of the Regiment of Cadets. So he released that article next. And again, he wove together other stories in a way that completely misconstrued my presidency and what I've been trying to do as president.
You take all this, and I mean, one thing I know about you that others don't know is I know this strong, courageous friend and admiral and president, but something I know about you too is you are sensitive, you are caring, you are in a way, and I don't want to put this in a negative terms, but the softest admiral I've ever met. And so, you got this caring, soft side, right? I mean, in fact, when we met, I think it was at one time at a youth event that you were taking your boys to when they were very young. So, what's the biggest, we've got leaders, we've all been through some, not like this, but gotten attacked. What would you do differently next time? Or is there anything? You stayed on your integrity. You stayed doing the right thing. You've been attacked. You will be again in your role. But I should say this, by the way, to everybody listening. Before you were there, talking about a challenging situation, I believe there were 3 or 4 presidents in 5 years, right?
I was the 5th president in 4 years.
5th president in 4 years, right? So you talk about challenges of the place and the culture and all you've been trying to do there. There was challenges for sure. But what have you learned from this challenge specifically?
I guess, first of all, again, as a leader, you might start something off with all the best intentions, and it's going to go south on you. You may have all the right intentions in the world. It's going to go south on you. So I'd say that's the first thing is, sometimes you just got to be prepared for something coming out of left field. Like, wait a minute, where's this coming from? I started this regiment review to make the regiment better and stronger, period.
Mm-hmm. But how would you have prepared for that? It's like, how would you prepare for the pandemic? Like, how would have you prepared?
I think the key is getting back to what I said before. I think the key is, making sure that you build strong relationships with a broad constituency and that people know who you are. So what happened when this came out, this maritime blogger, he got a number of emails and letters from people who do know me, who basically told him to knock it off, that it was completely not accurate. Again, one thing I did do is I reached out to the external review committee, the 8 people. They, as a committee, wrote the blogger and tried to correct the facts with him. So I think the first thing is as a leader, if you can be authentic and build relationships, you're going to have advocates for you. And I think you need to rely on your advocates to support you personally, and also rely on your advocates to speak out on your behalf. So that it's not you necessarily speaking out, but it's really all your advocates who know you, who trust you, who are speaking out on your behalf.
So let's jump to another part of leadership here, because I think of you and what I remember in some of my interactions, and I'm thinking of being on campus at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy the most. Still the military is top down. You do this, this person, you get a directive and you're supposed to listen to it. And yet what I've seen with you with your leadership team, when we sat around the table, even virtually times, you personally, in a military-esque environment, are quite consensus driven. And so how did you you see the military this way, you see being captain over here for 20 some years, you got to make a directive, but you've also been able to meld, because I've been in parts of the military. I'm thinking of one specific situation I was in working with the military, and it was I watched the directive environment, that's supposed to speed things up because you just take the directive. And in this situation, because the bottom couldn't think and make an action quickly, it actually slowed it down. And in this situation I saw, and I've seen you add, consensus work, a kind of a new way in the midst of an environment that is still top down. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting you speak to this. So, again, in trying to make the regiment better and stronger, in trying to help the upper class understand that effective leadership is not necessarily being top-down directive, but again, by truly leading people, mentoring people, guiding people, working, listening to people, getting multiple inputs in your decision making. Certainly the military has evolved dramatically into this model of really, more of a consensus type of, I think as leaders, any leader, military or civilian, there's that tough balance between, okay, if you try to lead too much by consensus, you're almost paralyzed, right? And people don't see you as an effective leader because they don't see you really making decisions. They see you keep on asking people and trying to reach consensus. So I've always found this issue to be a really careful balance between, taking the time to build consensus and to listen to people and gather inputs from multiple perspectives and multiple constituencies and then arriving at a decision. But at the same time, when necessary, saying, this is what we're going to do, period. This is where we're going to go. And I'll just give you a quick story.
I've seen the
about
problem on both sides too. This is really good stuff because I've seen people to be too directive, and I've seen people actually just to want to be consensus, kind of for their own selfishness. I want everybody to agree with me, so we'll only go where we agree. And you're the leader. You got to make the bottom line decision too. Yeah. Go ahead.
So I think it's a very careful balance, David.
Yeah,
it's a very careful balance. And I'll just give you a quick story on this. So this year, at one point, I heard the major general in the Army who's in charge of all Army accessions, whether it be boot camp, officer candidate school, warrant officers. He's in charge of all accessions. And what the Army's trying to do is move away from this, what they call the shark attack model of, boot camp, where the recruits show up and they're pounced on by the drill instructors and they're yelling, screaming in their face. And he says, you know what? This is not the way the Army used to do, bring a civilian in and help them transition to a soldier. This was only this only became about during the Vietnam War, during the draft, the draft Army. So the Army's trying to transition back towards a model of this transition from civilian to soldier that really involves, again, real leadership, real mentoring, real guiding. And so what happens on the first day of boot camp is that after the recruits get all their basic gear and they show up where they're at their barracks, they lead them through what's called the first 100 yards. And on each drill instructor's patch, it says, "Follow me." And so what they do is they get a tasking. It's all Hollywood-esque. They get a tasking over the radio. We got to go do this. We got to, accomplish this task, which of course involves going through mud and climbing walls and carrying stuff. But instead of the drill instructors just yelling at the recruits, the drill instructors are doing it with the recruits. They're crawling through the mud. They're carrying all the gear. They're climbing the walls. And so what the Army's trying to do is get back to this model of follow me, and what he said is, the most effective drill instructors right now, the most effective drill instructors are the ones that are in the evening. They go up in the barracks and talk to the recruits and say, how are you doing? Why did you join the Army? What's going on at home that you think I need to be aware of? And so, David and I both know that really is effective leadership, whether it's leading a company or leading a brand new recruit through boot camp. That's effective leadership.
We understand the frustration of overspending on training programs without seeing long-term culture change and measurable results. From decades of working with top brands and organizations, we have seen that building a high-performing, high-trust culture is the only way to create a lasting impact. High-trust leaders make the difference between a flavor of the month training initiative and measurable learning and development. Our community of Trustees certified partners is equipped with a suite of tools to build a high-performing, high-trust culture where people can perform at their best. So if you want to start solving the root issue in your organization and produce lasting results, head to trustedgeplatform.com to learn more. And now, back to the show.
So how did you take some of the times over your career, you've had different roles of leadership. What have you learned is most effective for building trust, especially when you had to do it quickly? I'm thinking about, this last role as president, you got, 5 presidents in 4 years. How did you, in a totally different space, you're not here, you're not at the academy, I'm, jumping into a college, Maritime College. How did you build trust? What worked?
What I'm flattered the most about, David, is over my career, I keep on hearing people describe me as, Mike is authentic. I hear it all the time. it's nothing I try to do. It's nothing that I it's just something that I'm complete, authentic and transparent. Mike is authentic. Mike is transparent. You know what you're going to get with Mike. And it's nothing that I've ever really thought about of being intentional about it. It's just kind of maybe who I am a little bit. But I think those are the two key words: transparency and authenticity build trust. And it's something you just have to do every day. I think you always got to be mindful that, again, as a leader, I told the upper class this, they're leading the regiment, the underclass, they're watching you every day. They're watching what you do every day. So if you're telling them that they need to look good in uniform, you better look good in uniform, and so, I think as leaders, we always got to remember people are watching us all the time, and they're not judging us by our words. They're judging us by our actions and by our deeds. And so I just try to always be every day, just true to who I am, be authentic, be transparent, and the people know this is what they're going to get with me. And they may like it, they may not like it, but they're going to know who I am.
In my experience, I just got to say, because, in my limited experience with you, and there's other parts of the military, obviously we've worked with, got a significant work we're doing now with the Navy and some others, but you are unique, Mike. It's like there's this, I'm thinking of some of the leaders that are like, boom, 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 bottom line. You're like leading in a big way, but there's another word I would add to what I've seen, and that is humility. And I see there's just a humbleness, a willingness to learn, all these roles you've had, and I think this is a big deal today. I think it's a big missing component of leaders that they're missing to make them great leaders. And I think, the opposed, those that are arrogant are opposed in some ways. We just oppose the arrogant, and we give grace to the humble. We listen to the humble. Like we will follow those that are humble instead of this. But it is different than this old way of what people think in the military. The way I see you, one of the things I just think is unique. Here's an admiral, president, all these things, but you got this humility and authenticity, and you're like, yeah, I don't know, but I can definitely see the authentic and transparent, and how unique it is in your space.
Yeah, Dave, honestly, you asked about daily habits. One thing, frankly, I pray and think about every day is just guard my heart against being arrogant, guard my heart against thinking that I'm more important than this job. So I do agree with you that, we have to guard our hearts against this kind of arrogant attitude as leaders. And I do pray and I think about how can I be humble.
But it is kind of, it's easy. It's like once you get first class, you kind of feel like you deserve it in the plane, right? Once you get your own living quarters on the college, and you get this beautiful thing, and you got someone else will make the meal, and you got the whatever it is. It's like at the academy, it's like, you start to feel like it's like that takes work to consistently be humble.
Yeah, for example, this position comes with a car and a driver. I said, college can't afford the driver. Get rid of the driver. I'll drive myself. I don't need to be driven around. If I need to be driven around, I'll ask my wife to do it. but again, just sorting out kind of some of the things that come with the position that just aren't necessary. What I've seen, again, past presidents do, and this is a very common mistake with college presidents. They walk in, and the first thing they do is say, okay, I'm going to spend $50,000 on renovating the quarters. I'm going to spend $75,000 on renovating my office. I walked in and I said, I'm not going to make that mistake, because I've seen what happens when colleges, that are frankly many colleges are in financial difficulty. And the first thing the president says is, I want to spend $100,000 on making my life more comfortable. No, my office was adequate. My house was adequate. And I made the intentional decision to not be subject to criticism for wasteful spending, frankly. And I think some I've seen other college presidents do it. They just walk in and they want all of this stuff. And it's just like, no, that's just really not, you don't need that to do your job and be effective with your job.
Who's someone, back to leadership here, who's someone who's inspired you as a leader? Who are some of those that inspired you to be who you are today?
Briefly, two people. First of all, one of the previous superintendents at the Coast Guard Academy one of my responsibilities when I was at the academy was all colleges have to go through an accreditation process that validates the quality of their programs and that they're able to meet their mission. And I was a fairly junior officer, and I said, okay, I'd like to serve on the accreditation committee. And my boss was kind of the person that was the chair of this committee. And my boss suddenly retired. And so the next thing you know, I'm a junior member of the committee. They said, Mike, you're in charge of this committee for accreditation. And it was a multi-year effort, and the college did great through accreditation and got really glowing comments from the accreditors, and we did just fine accreditation. So one day I'm walking back to my office from class, and there's a superintendent of the Coast Guard Academy waiting for me in my office to thank me for my service to the college, to the academy, to make sure that we got reaccredited. That made a huge impression on me about servant leadership, David. Servant leadership, about my boss waiting for me in my office to thank me. And so one thing that I do is I make a point to get out and go to people's offices, go to people's workspaces, so they see the president, in their workspaces. And one thing Kim and I do every year, and Kim, everyone thinks we're nuts for doing this, but every Christmas we bake Kim bakes. I won't say we, Kim.
By we, I mean Kim.
Kim bakes a small, it might be a mini loaf of pumpkin bread. It might be a mini gingerbread cake. We bake it's just for like about 100 people. She bakes them. And then I write cards out to remember my staff. And we, around Christmas time, go to every staff office and we give them a small little baked good and a card to thank them. David, you have no idea how that little gesture has impacted my staff. That Kim and I take the time for that little gesture to say thank you. Big impact. The other person that's inspired me, of course, is my father. He's passed away. But my dad struggled. My dad worked in law enforcement, but also struggled with alcoholism. And so one of his last jobs he did was he went to work in a maximum security prison in Ohio to process the prisoners coming in. He'd be responsible for the fingerprinting and the photography and bringing the prisoners in. He transitioned to basically a substance abuse counselor in the prison system and helping people get over their substance abuse. And his attitude was, if you don't heal the spirit of the man, they're going to just come back. They're going to be back in prison. So he really worked hard at ministering and healing the spirit of the man so they would not come back to prison. My mom and dad flew out to Colorado to see my brother Chuck. And my mom at that point was dealing with cancer, so she was in a wheelchair. So we're flying back to Cleveland. My mom's in the wheelchair, and my dad's at the carousel getting the luggage, and he feels this hand on his shoulder. And my dad turns around, and he didn't recognize him right away, but it was one of his prisoners, and he says, "You may not remember me, but you're one of the prisoners you helped in prison. You saved my life. Can I carry your luggage?" And I'll always remember that story of my father. Again, a servant leader, a man who really was out to, help the people around him, serve the people around him, and make life better for the people around him. And I'll always remember that story of my father. And they'll always inspire me, to kind of be the kind of person that my father was.
I had a lot more questions, but I can't think of a better place to drop the mic than a trusted leader like your father and like the superintendent. Those are trusted leaders. Maybe I'll ask you this though: what's next for Dr. Mike Alfultis?
I struggle with that decision every day. I've been I've been president of Maritime College for 8 years, and if any of your listeners are in higher education, they know a tenure of a college president is usually 6. So I'm certainly been serving longer than is typical of a college president. And I'm struggling with that, how much longer, what else do I need to accomplish? I've accomplished things at the college that people never thought would ever be accomplished. And so I'm asking myself, when is enough? When is it, my next, frankly, is retirement. It's just to enjoy time with my children and my wife. That's my next step. And I just keep on asking myself, when is enough? When have I served the college enough? is there more work that needs to get done? And so there are some issues at the college right now that I think I really need to address. So where I'm at right now is narrowing in on those 2 or 3 things that I think I need to address to hand over the college to my successor. So I'm thinking about, how do I set my successor up for success by dealing with some of the issues that I think need to be dealt with on my watch, on my tenure, and then be ready to hand the baton over to the next person, but handing them over a college that's in a good position and really setting them up for success by what I'm trying to do before I make the decision to step down.
One sentence, you got a brand new leader. They're jumping out. They're being a captain. They're being a manager at a company. What advice do you give them?
I think my advice is you need to find somebody that you can confide in outside of your company. It's outside of your responsibility, someone that you can fall back on, rely on, talk to, get advice, get support. Honestly, David, being at the top, I know this is said a lot, but it is kind of lonely at the top, because you got to be careful of, who you can confide in within your organization, because you may find out that you may say something to someone of confidence, and next thing you know, it's all over your organization. Yeah. So I think the best piece of advice I'd have is build those relationships with people that you can trust, that you can fall back on and rely on, and when times of need, when you need advice, when you need support.
If you're doing leadership alone, you're doing it wrong, and yet it is lonely. And so, how do you build out that accountability, that mentorship, that team for life? No doubt about it. Any resource you would recommend? Any book or anything that you'd recommend for people? Just
real briefly. So I had my entire cabinet read this book. It's oriented toward higher education, but I think it would open up a lot of people's eyes outside higher education. It's called Fix Your Climate, a practical guide to reducing microaggressions, microbullying, and bullying in the academic workspace. It's by Anderson and Young. It is on Amazon. That book really helped. That book will really make you think about what you say and what you do in terms of microaggressions and microbullying, things that you never even thought would offend or hurt somebody. But when you read this book, it really starts to get you to think more about what is the kind of climate and culture you're building within your organization, by whether you accept these little, we talk, death by 1,000 pricks, right? So if one person in your organization is constantly hearing these little comments, these subtle actions, that person is going to feel marginalized, and that person is not going to be effective. And what this book talks about is, it'll really affect the effectiveness of your organization when you allow this sorts of behavior of, the subtle comments, the subtle behaviors. And so this book really helped my cabinet and I really think about what kind of climate we're trying to create at the college, and what we're trying to do in terms of being more careful by what we say and by what we do. Those little actions that could cause, over time, can cause a lot of harm, and can really hurt an organization's effectiveness by affecting the climate and the culture of the organization. So again, it is written for higher education, but I think it's a great book to read for anybody about this issue of microbullying, microaggressions, and bullying in the workplace.
Great idea. Fix Your Climate. So in the show notes, trustedleadershow.com, we'll put the bio, a little bit more about Dr. Michael Alfultis. We'll put the link to this book, Fix Your Climate. I'm going to get it. And anything else he'd allow us or let us share. Mike, I often end with the message or the question, who's a leader you trust and why? And I think we heard a couple that inspire you. Is there any other, are there any other leaders that come to mind, or people in your life that come to mind that really, I trust that? Or maybe it's the people that somebody that you connect with as far as your little personal board that you've talked about, that you like keep some people outside. Anybody else?
Well, I think frankly, my pastor, I relied on her so much in my struggles of the past 6 months. It just, leaning on her and talking to her, it's been tremendously helpful. She's got such a great spirit that I trust her so much. And I know, frankly, I know she supports me, through her thoughts and prayers, I know she's supporting me. So, and honestly, Dave, I'll just end with a really quick story. I just got an email yesterday from a member of my staff. She went to the chapel on campus, and she said, "Mike, we just want you to know, someone on campus, we don't know who, but someone on campus wrote in the book of the chapel that they're praying for you." And I don't know who it is, but boy, it meant the world to me to just know that someone's thinking about me and supporting me in the way that they can through their faith and through their prayers. But I'd say that, the other person that right now that's helping me the most in getting through some of these things is just being able to go talk, confide in my pastor and talk to my pastor, because I know I can completely trust her and rely on her.
Dr. Admiral Michael Alfultis, friend, I am so grateful for you, for the friendship, for the way you've made me better, for just the times we've had, and for this just sharing some wisdom with our audience. And I'll put out a public invitation. Maybe it'll put some pressure on. So for the next Trusted Leader Summit, we're going to publicly invite Dr. Mike to come out and to share the stage with us and pay for you to be there and bring Kim out. And we'd love to have you. We had the summit's amazing people. We have everything from senators to CEOs, but we would love to, and others, but we'd love to have you out to that next, let's see, November, I believe it's something 7th through the 9th, 2023 is the next Trusted Leader Summit, but we'd love to have you there. In the midst of that, I just want to thank you personally. Thanks for being a friend. Thanks for what you're doing for our country and our world. And that has been the Trusted Leader Show. Until next time, stay trusted.